The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. On behalf of the National Network of Sector Partners, welcome to Building Strong Employer Involvement in Sector-Focused Workforce Partnerships. We are so pleased that you could join us today. This webinar is the first in a series that's designed to help sector initiatives, particularly those in the Mid-South, increase their effectiveness. And we've chosen today's topic based on input that we received from sector initiatives and their supporters in Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. But we no doubt feel that it's absolutely relevant to sector initiatives around the country. And based on the interest we've received in today's session, it's clear that you feel the same way. So thanks for joining us. My name is Jim Torrens of the National Network Sector Partners, and I will be your moderator today. And I'm joined in our Oakland offices by Laverne Gardner, who is providing us technical support and making sure that everything runs smoothly. So thank you, Laverne. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with the National Network of Sector Partners, NNSP is an initiative of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. And the Insight Center is a national nonprofit research, consulting, and advocacy and legal services organization that is dedicated to building economic security in low-income communities. And the way we work throughout our history has been to develop and test new models and approaches for building economic security, then promoting the promising ones nationally as best practices in the field, and working with both policymakers and practitioners to develop supportive policy. And the Insight Center was among the first organizations in the country to identify what we now call a sector initiative, or the sectoral employment model, a way of organizing workforce development services effectively to meet the needs of both industries and workers. And in 1999, Insight Center founded the National Network of Sector Partners, which is a membership organization with hundreds of sector initiatives and supporters around the country as members that advocates for sector initiatives, promotes the sector approach, and provides support to organizations that are either implementing sector projects or are developing policies and funding mechanisms to support them. And we invite you to join us, become members of the National Network of Sector Partners, and both support our work as well as connect with your peers around the country and receive information that's useful to you, such as this webinar. You can find more information about us at www.nnsp.org. I mentioned that there's a particular focus on the Mid-South, and I just want to say that we are working with organizations, particularly in the 5 states I mentioned, to, again, promote the sector approach and develop supports for that. This session is brought to you at no cost through funding from the Mott Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, that is particularly supporting that work. And the Mott Foundation has been a great supporter of the sector movement and NNSP from its inception. In that vein, for those of you who are calling in from the Mid-South region, I want to flag for you that we are having a conference in Jackson, Mississippi in a couple of weeks. I'll send information after the webinar along with materials from this session. But please do check it out if you think that you're interested in sharing what you know about sector and learning more from others, as well as just promoting the sector approach in the Mid-South. Okay, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have a great panel for you today. Jack Mills is my colleague at the Insight Center who directs the National Network of Sector Partners. And he's going to begin by presenting a framework for thinking about and taking action towards building employer involvement in your industry-focused workforce development partnership or sector initiative. And he'll also bring in examples of sector initiatives from NNSP's network around the country that are involving employers in innovative ways. So Jack, thanks for sharing your perspective today and being on the webinar. We're also honored to have with us Janice Sneed, who oversees a healthcare sector initiative in Shreveport, Louisiana. Janice is going to share on-the-ground information about what really works for her in engaging with healthcare employers in her region to improve outcomes for her students and also to meet employer needs. So Janice, we're thrilled to have you on this webinar. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll just go through a few logistical items. Just if you haven't been on one of our webinars before, your control panel can be hidden by clicking the arrow on the upper left. And if you click it again, then it will return if you need to input a question or to do something else. Your audio is by phone, and right now you're in listen-only mode, but we do want to hear your questions and comments later, so please take a minute to enter your audio PIN. Otherwise, I won't be able to call on you and unmute you when it's time. You can also let me know if you have a question by submitting a question through the questions pane, in which case I will send you a message to let you know when we'll be able to give you a chance to ask it, or by raising your hand, in which case I'll also contact you behind the scenes. So once again, it's really important to us that we get your questions and that we have a chance to hear from you also about what's been successful in your work involving employers. And that's how you can do it. I do want to mention that this session is being recorded and that links to the recording, the slideshows, and other relevant materials will be sent to you after the webinar. So don't feel like you have to jot everything down or transcribe these slides. You will receive them later. Your input is really important to us and will help inform future webinars. I mentioned that this is the first in a series that we're doing, and we will be providing other webinars that are geared towards helping sector initiatives improve their or increase their effectiveness on topics that reflect your input. So at the end of the session, if you could just take 30 seconds to, maybe less, to let us know what we did well, what we can improve, and what we ought to focus on in future sessions, we would really appreciate it. We take this feedback very seriously and try to tailor future sessions based on what we hear. So just a little background. I mentioned that we are the National Network of Sector Partners, and that we focus on the sector method of organizing workforce development services. If you're not familiar with that, I just want to give a brief background because it's important for the context here. A sector initiative is a regional, industry-focused approach to workforce and economic development that improves access to good jobs and increases job quality in ways that strengthen an industry's workforce. And the important things about this really are that that's regional. It's not based on a pre-existing geographic or political boundary, that it's industry-focused. It depends on deep knowledge of particular industry and connection with multiple employers in that industry. That it's a dual customer approach. It really provides benefits both to the target industry and businesses within that industry and to job seekers and workers. I'd also mention that it really involves not only serving a certain number of participants and helping employers hire a certain number of individuals, but also changing the way that systems work to better meet the needs of both groups. It's a new way of doing business. Here are some characteristics of sector initiatives as we've identified them at NNSP. I just mentioned the industry focus and the role of partnerships with multiple employers. And I just flagged that because the idea is to sustain relationships over a period of time and to develop deep connections with employers, it really is not only about transactions, but also about building relationships with those employers and satisfying both sets of needs. The role of a workforce intermediary is also essential, and that's the mechanism often by which employers become involved in the various programs. So I think I touched on the other characteristics of sector initiatives. We'll invite your questions if you have more questions about sector initiatives and what role that employer involvement plays in that as we go further into the presentation. I will also just say that the sector approach has been really rigorously proven to be effective both for workers or job seekers and for employers. And in particular, a random assignment study demonstrated the impact on earnings and plenty of other employment outcomes for the participants as compared to a control group that did not participate. It's very compelling evidence. Some of the common elements of the model programs that were studied included a strong link to employers that results in understanding of the target occupation and connection to jobs, job readiness and skills training that is tailored specifically to the needs of the industry, and recruitment, screening, and intake processes that results in a good match between applicants and training programs and downstream jobs. All three of those characteristics of programs that have this documented impact, all three of those characteristics are dependent on strong relationships with employers, which is why we feel that employer involvement is perhaps the strongest predictor of effectiveness. So given all that, I will turn things over now to my colleague Jack Mills, who's going to present a kind of conceptual framework for thinking about employer involvement and also starting to take action on building it. So Jack, take it away.
Hello everyone, I'm glad to be with you. Jim, maybe we can go to the next slide right away. I want to say a little bit about who we are. Jim's giving you a good overview. I guess to put a little bit of action so what do we do to achieve what we want to do? We focused on community economic development. That means increasing both income and also wealth so people can achieve economic security. If you think about the role of sector initiatives in that effort, one is to promote regional economic growth by supporting key industries to grow and prosper. A second thing is to make it possible for people to get to a level where they can support themselves and their other members of their family or households. And then third thing is to improve equity by overcoming the disparities in the labor market, disparities due to race or ethnicity or gender or age, so that everyone has an equal shot at economic security. Now, Jim, maybe you could go to the next slide. What we've learned from sector initiatives that are NNSP members is that strong employer involvement is vital to their effectiveness in achieving the things that I just mentioned, and also to their sustainability so that they can continue to have broad support and resources. So when I say strong employer involvement, obviously the question is, well, what does that mean? So first of all, there are 6 types of involvement. As we've looked at what sector initiatives have done to involve employers, sector initiatives that are NNSP members, the first level is to introduce themselves to the employer. And then it goes through the variety of types to the point of supporting the sector initiative. And this isn't a hierarchy. These are different kinds of involvement or different types of involvement where you can find employers seeing it in their interest and certainly in the sector initiative interest to be involved. Let's go to the next slide. For each type of involvement, an employer may be involved a little bit or a lot. So there are 5 stages that we found of involvement, and you can see that arrow on the slide that shows that this is a hierarchy. You tend to move from initial contact with an employer all the way over through regular and deep involvement to having employers playing a leadership role. Let's go to the next slide. So in general, the goal is to broaden the types of involvement, looking down that column on the far left, so that employers that are involved in one way get involved in more than one way, and hopefully in all the different ways, and also to deepen the stages of involvement. And you can see or you may be able to see, it's pretty light, that there's an arrow that leads from the upper left-hand corner down to the lower right-hand corner, which kind of communicates that idea that for any employer, you may want to try to move them to the point of having more involvement in different types of activity in your sector initiative, and then also deeper involvement. The thing is, though, that that's the general goal. Maybe more importantly, what this model does is to make it possible for you to analyze what kind of involvement you have with an employer, and to be thoughtful, be strategic about how to involve that employer in the best way. And when I say best way, what I mean is so it meets the employer's self-interest, or the interest of the employer representative with whom you're working more generally, and also meets the interest in terms of achieving the goals of your industry-focused workforce development program. What you'll see in each of the boxes here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but more generally, these are some indicators. They're indicators of what kind of involvement you might experience at each stage and for each type of involvement. Just to get into some examples, and this I'll be very brief on. At the introductory level, learning, well, you do a lot of work to establish knowledge of and an understanding of the sector initiative with an employer who's at the introductory stage. But you also want to establish a relationship. So there's some interaction, and there's some trust building, there's some participation in events. It's a getting to know you stage. Some people talk about this as dating. And let me just say one other thing. We don't often think about the systems change aspect of this. That is, changing policies or changing the way that workforce development is delivered, and what services are delivered, and how they're coordinated, or even changing what employers do, their practices around recruitment or retention or learning on the job. In fact, we find that employers are very interested in supporting a legislative agenda, or supporting changes in financing so that it's easier to create jobs, or supporting changes in the educational system, and even changes that make it easier for them to recruit and retain and train up their workforce. So those are some things that we've seen employers do. Jim, why don't you go to the next slide? So, of course, the big question is, how do you involve new employers? And the first thing is, other employers are great at recruiting additional employers. One way of thinking about this, though, is that employers relate to each other not only in terms of business relationships, but also, and even probably more importantly, through social networks. When you think about an employer, one reality about that is that you actually build a relationship with an individual. I'm going to use the term employer representative for who I'm talking about. Who's that individual friends with? You know, who do they interact with through the Chamber of Commerce or at the golf course? What kinds of social activities do they care about? We see a lot of employer representatives who are busy on the times when they're not at work in their communities. So when you map those kinds of relationships with employers who you do have involved, it provides you the key to how those employers who you have involved, how their representatives can connect with and encourage representatives of other employers to get involved. You know, then it's a matter of moving them from the introductory level on up. But before I go back to that, you know, of course, staff also play a key role. And the two things I'd say about that are, if there's a staff member who has benefited the employer in some way from the point of view of that employer representative, or has a relationship in which the employer representative respects the staff person, you know, that's a really good beginning point for bringing in a new employer. I also want to say that if that's some of the how, there's also the what. Employers really need to understand how their involvement is going to benefit them. So you want to market the value proposition. Oftentimes employers want to know more than how it will benefit their companies, you know, how it will benefit job seekers and workers and also the community. But you can see that on this slide, benefits to employers is bold because that's what you really want to focus on in making the case for employer involvement. Jim, let's go to the next slide. So a key question once employers are involved at an introductory level is how to broaden and deepen those relationships. So, you know, one question is, how do you get them from some, you know, sort of miscellaneous catch-as-catch-can or occasional involvement to full involvement and even over to being leaders. And the first thing that we found is that using this model, you can set criteria, because working with employers as a undifferentiated group and trying to involve them all may not be the best use, well, isn't the best use of a sector initiative's time and resources. It's helpful to identify those employers with whom it's more likely that you can build relationships so that they can reach the leadership stage. You know, if you use the model and set some criteria about which employers, you know, which employers you'd want to have involved, which employers are likely to reach the leadership stage, that gives you a way of using staff time and the very valuable resource of the time of employers who are already involved very, very well. The second thing is that we found that things change for employers. So, you know, we had a real tough time starting in 2008. The economy was really in tough shape, and all employers pulled their horns in. Less so in healthcare, less so early on in among governmental employers. Certainly finance and manufacturing and construction, information technology, those sectors were really hit hard by the recession, and we're climbing out. Since the early days, government's been hit really hard, and there's no good news in terms of public sector budgets, so that's likely to continue. The reason I'm talking about this is because it's important to stay with the employers, maintain long-term relationships as things change for them, and figure out how to attain mutual benefit for the employer and benefit for your sector initiative as the employer's needs change. And that takes a lot of work. That really does. But the point of it is that the trust you gain, the fact that you stay with that employer through thick and thin, that's going to be very valuable as you try to convince the employer that you really want them to step up, you really want them to move from that some involvement level to, deep involvement and leadership. And of course, as employers build that relationship, not only are they interested in how broadening and deepening the relationship benefits themselves, but also how it benefits the sector initiative. Jim, let's go to the next slide. If that gives you a framework, I want to talk about some activities. So it's very important to think about the person. What are the other roles in addition to the role at work that employer, well, certainly the role at work is the most important thing, but what are other roles that the employer representative has? What role in the company and also in the community does that employer representative play? So for a smaller company where there's not a human resources department, the CEO may also be the operations manager, and they're spending a lot of time at the workplace because they've got a lot of different things in the air. They may really be focused on their company, but they may also play an important role in their church. They may be a deacon, or they may be a coach on one of the local sports teams. Knowing what those interests are, knowing what those social networks are, really helps in terms of how you can find a way to broaden and deepen the relationship, and particularly who can connect with that employer representative. Employer representatives have multiple interests. So first and foremost is the employer's needs, but there may be personal interests. The employer representative may be interested in gaining some skills through which they can broaden what they do at work, and the sector initiative may provide them a way to do that. Or it may provide them a way of demonstrating skills, particularly around leadership, that is in their interest. Some employer representatives are very interested in exerting influence on the sector initiative. They really want to see themselves in a decision-making role rather than just in a customer role. And of course, some play an important leadership role in the community and see that as being essential to who they are. If you can identify what those interests are for the employer representative, this also really helps as a way of having the conversation about broadening and deepening involvement. Now, of course, activities that fit the interests that you've discovered for that employer representative are going to be the best ones to involve them in. And then, celebrating success. So it's true for all volunteer work that considering what that value add is for that volunteer and celebrating the result of it is very important for continuing success at volunteer involvement. This goes for employers too. And as you think about where that employer is or where that employer representative is on the employer involvement model, what type of involvement they have and what stage they're at, well, be intentional. Plan for broader and deeper involvement. Know where you're going or where you'd like to go with that employer representative, and ask for broader or deeper involvement when the right moment comes. Either where there's a a new role that you can really see that person fitting into, or where they've just done something great and it's a moment where they're feeling very good about their involvement. Those are two examples of a good time to ask for broader and deeper involvement. Jim, let's go on to the next slide. So the last thing I want to talk about is, you know, one of the things that's very important for sector initiatives, and that is to make it possible for participants to become employed. As you involve employers, one of the aspects of that employment is of that involvement is this issue of employment. So first of all, some of the criteria you may want to have when you set out to figure out which employers you want to involve is how good are their jobs? How strong are the pathways from entry level on up to higher level and better jobs? Once you know which employers you want to work with, then the next step is to make the value proposition clear. And that is oftentimes what you'll see on this slide. Employers care about costs they have and risks they have to take. To the extent that you can reduce work that they have to do or reduce other costs, to the extent that you can diminish risks by providing, let me say, an insurance policy through the training you provide or the support services you provide or the retention services you offer, all of that is a benefit to the employer. Of course, the other half of the value proposition is that the work of the sector initiative can increase the productivity of the workforce. So certainly the skill development, but also the reduction in turnover can make workers more productive. But also the time that supervisors do not have to spend on rehiring, do not have to spend on training, do not have to spend on covering when somebody's not at work on a day because they can't get child care. Your sector initiative has provided them with child care, so that's not an issue. Well, that time that supervisors would otherwise have to use solving problems with those who they supervise, that time can go to marketing, or it can go to improving quality. There's a whole variety of roles that supervisors can play that add more value, that make them more productive. Once you've made the value proposition clear, you have to make the ask. You have to ask the employer to be your customer. Now, this is a very common relationship for private sector businesses, so I guarantee you they will understand. And one of the things about it is most times when somebody comes to them and says, we'd like you to be our customer, the employer assumes that there's going to be some payment involved, that they're going to pay for what they get. So it's a good relationship within which to start the conversation around having the employer provide you compensation for some of the value that you provide. Now, that customer relationship is less common for nonprofits, if there are nonprofits in your industry sector, and also for public sector entities, if you have public sector entities who hire from your sector initiative. But still, you can have that conversation. Last but not least, going from the request to an agreement is very important to formalize what the relationship is. So providing a draft agreement that makes clear what the responsibilities are of the sector initiative and what the employer will do around hiring is the final stage in the process. You know, there are very good examples of these agreements in Arkansas, just as one example, just as one state, where employers have committed to interviewing or to hiring people who come through the sector initiative. And there are lots of other examples. I just wanted to choose one from one of the southern states we work with. Jim, I'd like to end there. of course, there are resources and training and other kinds of assistance that an NSP can provide, and so maybe you can go to that now or later. But those are the ideas that I wanted to present.
Jack, thank you. That's a great framework that's triggering a number of comments and questions. I'd invite you to submit your questions now. We'll have time for questions after Janice's presentation, both because I think it'll be helpful to get the perspective from her work on the ground and give her a chance to answer them after she's presented, as well as to get Jack's comments. Just to flag a couple that I've shared with the group where I'm also, you have a chance to weigh in and share your expertise. We got one question talking about the struggle getting some employers from the some relationship to the regular involvement level. If you have had particular success in that, maybe you can share that through the chat window or the questions pane, and I will share it with the group. We also have a question that maybe Janice and Jack, you can think about during this next stage of the presentation, which is, what should be the normal, what's the normal proportion of employers in the different stages or categories of involvement? And maybe we'll have a chance to give the questioner a chance to ask that after Janice's. And we've also had an offer from Janice Urbanik in Cincinnati to share an employer involvement model that she and her partners developed there. I also have one from JVS in San Francisco, where I used to work. If you have a plan or an employer involvement model, a strategy document describing how you approach employers, I invite you to share it with us. We will include it in the materials that we send to folks after the webinar, and that way, the more the better. So we know there's a lot of good experience and expertise out there, and we just want to tap it for the benefit of everybody. Before we move on to Janice, I have a couple of quick polls just to get a sense of how you're thinking about employer involvement in the context of what Jack just mentioned. And we'll start with the first one, which is, of the types of employer involvement that Jack outlined, how does your initiative currently involve employers significantly? And you can choose more than one, but this might give some sense of an answer to that question about the proportion of employers in the different categories of engagement. What about in your involvement? What's the breakdown, or which of these categories in which of these categories are employers significantly involved? And I see folks are still voting, which is great. So we'll give you a few more seconds to get your vote in, and then we'll share the responses. It's a bit like watching popcorn in the microwave. You're waiting for that last pop. People are still voting. All right, I'm going to close the poll. It's a quick poll, and we'll just see what people submitted. So, obviously, as users, a lot of folks are involving employers as users or services, but it's fairly dramatic that there's significant involvement in the planning, governance, and oversight, and in service delivery, as well as in supporting the initiative. So that is great to see, and we hope that you will share what you're doing in those veins in our discussion and using the chat panel. So I have a related question, which is, of the types of employer involvement that are outlined, which would you like your initiative to do significantly more of? It's great to see such levels of employer involvement across initiatives participating, but where do you want to improve your work? And it'll be interesting to see how that relates to the answers in the previous question. And as before, we'll just give a few minutes or a few seconds for folks to weigh in. All right, a few last kernels popping, but it's slowing. I'm going to close the poll now, and we'll see what the results are. So, interestingly, and perhaps not surprisingly, involving more employers in promoting systems change is a major goal for folks. And that makes sense given the fact that that was an area where folks, where you didn't feel that you necessarily were doing a lot. Not that many of attendees highlighted that one as where they were doing significant work. And perhaps also not surprisingly, even though many of you say that employers are involved in supporting the initiative, you're certainly looking for more employer support for your initiative, and I can't say I blame you. Well, it's an interesting, just quick hit on the topics that Jack shared, the conceptual framework that he shared. I think what we should do now is move on and give Janice a chance to talk about her work in Shreveport. And I'll encourage you again, please send your questions and comments. We will have time after Janice's presentation to really dive into those and have more chance for discussion. So let's move on to Janice now. Go ahead.
Hello, good day to everyone. Let me begin by thanking Insight, Jim and Jack. We all certainly appreciate the work that they do to keep us all informed and connected in this wonderful learning network that they have. I'm excited about the opportunity to share with all of you today, and I'm looking forward to the exchange. I'll begin my statements today by saying, it is without hesitation that I submit to you successful sector initiatives and training begin with strong employer involvement. And it's obvious that most of you feel the same way today because we do have a great turnout. Strong employer involvement aligns with the late Stephen Covey's habit, beginning with the end in mind. The end in today's discussion is the employer, jobs, retention, and of course job satisfaction. I'll take it a bit further though. Not only must we begin with the end in mind, the employer must be integrated in all aspects of your training operation to obtain and sustain the kind of relationships and ultimately the outcomes that you're looking for. Next slide, please. The National Governors Association recently released some best practices, and one of their statements said, if you will allow, I will read, right now, most states have their attention on student access, student achievement, and degree completion in colleges and universities. To eliminate the problems, states have been creating, largely through their education systems, an entire infrastructure for boosting students' likelihood of succeeding in and graduating from college. But the changes we need do not end there. A new era of educational strength and economic competitiveness lies not only in colleges and universities getting more Americans into and successfully out of college, but also in colleges and universities, training providers now, helping create new, good-paying jobs in the economy and getting workers, both young and working adults, ready for those jobs. Again, that's beginning with the end in mind. Without strong employer involvement, the goals become difficult to obtain, if not impossible in my mind. Next slide, please, which basically leads to our discussion today. In my presentation, I'll speak briefly to 2 or 3 initiatives that we work with at Southern University at Shreveport. If you would, I'll give you a little background about SUSLA. You can go to the next slide. Southern University at Shreveport, SUSLA, as I would reference it in the remainder of my presentation, is a 2-year community college and also a historically black college and university, a HBCU, with a mission of preparing underserved students and the community at large, for we are an open enrollment institution for careers in technical fields and occupations. We have an enrollment of approximately 3,000 students, of which about half of those students are matriculating in healthcare professions. We certainly pride ourselves in our ability to meet students where they are academically and provide instruction and supportive services that produce trained workers ready for the workforce. We are also committed to community service and partnering to identify needs and working collectively to realize the successes that will facilitate economic growth and a better quality of life for all residents of our region. In my role as Southern, I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Community and Workforce Development. We are the outreach arm of the institution. We connect. We do our best to stay informed. We get involved to ensure the institution's awareness of the needs and the work that needs to be done in our community. We partner. We work to try to affect relevant change, and relevant to our conversation today, that of workforce development needs that need to be looked at and addressed. The individuals that I serve with in workforce, small business development, business, community, and corporate development, along with adult learning, we make it a priority to work collectively with our campus and the community based on various core values that's very important to any institution. Core values such as integrity, responsiveness, very important to business, partnerships, those are just a few. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Now we'll talk about an initiative that I see a lot of promise in, Workforce Innovations of North Louisiana. That's what WINLA stands for. It's a partnership funded by the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, Social Innovations Fund. And actually we were fortunate to have a number of partners in the local community, which you can see here, who has funded, helped to fund that initiative. It got started by our local community foundation, who made application for the funds for our region and worked diligently to solidify these partners that are noted here. They worked very closely with an organization, a workforce intermediary entitled CERT. CERT stands for the Consortium for Education, Research, and Technology. They serve as an intermediary and a convener. They actually facilitate all the colleges in North Louisiana, bringing 22 parishes together. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge them, because in delivering services to the workforce, you can't be all things to all people, and bringing all the educational trainers together in a facet like CERT does is very important to the process. Next slide, please. The objectives of the Healthcare Alliance are noted here. I'll just highlight a few. To involve employers as active partners and leaders in the planning and implementation of workforce partnerships, to expand the awareness and broad array of career opportunities, to offer high-quality real-world curricula and internships, strengthen alignments between adult education and post-secondary education, to offer multiple pathways and career ladders that enable individuals to move up the wage scales, to reduce barriers that limit access to career preparation, to promote development of better workforce policies and practices, to implement efforts to achieve and sustain workforce systems change and innovation. Next slide. WINLA got started, as I was saying earlier, through the National Fund, funding that was made available that we could apply to. The regional fund that received the money through through the leadership of our community foundation, they worked very hard to get those regional dollars brought to our area, and they decided to focus on two major sectors based on the needs of our community, that being energy and one area being healthcare. we actually took the lead in the healthcare, and another local community college, Bossier Parish Community College, took the lead in energy. And you can see here with the Wendler Healthcare Alliance, some of the things we've been doing. Our goals are to train 100 under and unemployed individuals. We'll assist with student training needs, development of curriculum, and below the last bullet you can see some of the training programs, new training programs that have come about as a result of the conversations. What's important is that it's employer driven. Before we even were able to make application to the Community Foundation, we had to bring all the healthcare leaders to the table and talk about what the needs were, making sure we're connecting the right individuals together in order to put a proposal together that would allow us to speak to what you see here today. Next slide. Okay. Now we'll talk a little bit about another program called Project Success. At Southern University, we've had good relationships with labor locally and nationally. This Project Success is our second grant through the Federal Office of Department of Labor and Employment and Training Administration. And the goal of that particular grant is to train 325 participants in adult education and workforce training. And as you can see, there are some of the training areas: dental hygiene, health information technology, nursing, medical lab, radiology, and respiratory. The grant performance period 2010 through 2013, and the grant was awarded for just a bit over $4 million. Next slide. And the target population: low income, unemployed, incumbent workers, single parents, automotive industry workers, veterans, high school dropouts. Next slide. And these are just some of the strategies that we wrote in that proposal in order to ensure the success of our participants, addressing some of the personal needs, establishing an intake center, working very closely with the employers, working very closely with the community to assess and identify workers that would be appropriate for the healthcare field, that would be a good fit, addressing whatever their needs and barriers may be, helping them to determine career focuses. Next slide. Providing employability skills, job readiness skills, advancing skills and retention, success strategies as we call them on campus. Next slide, please. And you can see some of the anticipated outcomes that are associated with the grant. And then we're just going to go a little bit into, next slide, a little bit into some of the strategies with regard to project success from an employer standpoint. We feel when you're working with a project as broad as Project Success and the number of healthcare agencies that you have to work with in order to maintain and keep those relationships going, having a multifaceted involvement with that employer is key. And when I say multifaceted, everything from our HR department on our campus, having a relationship with their HR department, our hiring specialists, knowing our job placement officer by name, and they having a very good relationship, the CEO of several of the local healthcare agencies and the chancellor of our university on first name basis. I could say with several of the healthcare agencies in town, they've elevated to what Jack referred to as that leadership role in our relationship. Additionally, it's very important for an agency or training provider to be involved in the community, to have an appreciation of what those needs are in the community, what people are doing, what agencies are out there, what nonprofits, so you can have an appreciation of how to align the best resources to get the best results. Here recently with the Wendler grant, I found out that we had an MLK Healthcare Center. They served the indigent population, and they also were looking for someone that would help them address the dental needs of their clients. And we have a dental program here, and we were trying to find more opportunity for our students to serve or get more hands-on experience. So that was a good relationship. We would not have had that partnership had we not been out in the community making connections. I just left it kind of point blank here. Don't bite off too much. That's kind of self-explanatory. One good way of not being able to grow a relationship is starting off on the wrong foot by not being able to keep your commitments. So start small. Do make promises based on what you know you can keep. Partner when it makes sense. I heard a little bit about this in the previous presentation. Some things are not your niche. Not to say that it may not one day grow to be your niche, but I think it's in your best interest to build on training programs that you already have at your institution. If you haven't maxed out the relationships with employers in that community, take it to that next level. Some of the commitments and relationships that you have could be elevated to another level if you focus on your the niches that you are good at. And of course, integrity speaks for itself, being consistent and being innovative. And you have to find those creative ways to communicate with your employer partners, innovative ideals, and to try to get them to think out the box, you know, obviously without offending them, but, you know, bringing those ideas is going to take it to another level if need be. Next slide, please. Incumbent worker training. I know many of you have probably incumbent worker training programs in your state. We have one in Louisiana. It's funded through our Workforce Commission. It allows us to write proposals and receive contracts. It's a partnership between that agency, the training provider, and the employer. It's very important that the training provider and the employer sit down and discuss what the needs are. From those discussions, a contract and a proposal is put together, and funding is put in place. There has to be a commitment from the employer to the training process. They find that has been very beneficial to the incumbent worker training program. Next slide. The incumbent worker training program was popular before people were talking about employer-driven programs. It's been around for a while. We've been receiving these type of grants probably since the early 2000s. This is a demonstration of some of the awards, and I just wanted to put to the right there the average satisfaction score on our quarterly ratings that we got from various employers that we did business with. And of course, one good sign of, one good indication of success is repeat business. And practically all of the businesses wanted to do second and third contracts. There's only so much money available, so the state only allows so many times for you to do repeat business. So that's the limitation in some regard. But we're happy with the services that we've been able to provide these agencies in our area.
Janice, this is Jim, and I'm just chiming in to encourage folks to begin sending their questions in. We're going to have a chance for them to ask you questions and Jack questions in just a few minutes. So,
okay, yeah, I'm getting close to the end.
You have been getting the questions, and would definitely look for more. And Janice, I was thinking that maybe what you could do, if you're willing, is to just go to talking about specific employer partnerships that you have to support both the incumbent worker training programs and project success. Maybe we skip ahead in the interest of time and just give you a chance to talk about, you know, in the context of a couple of specific employer relationships, whether you're, you know, how those have come about. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I think the next slide speaks to that, right?
I'm thinking about starting to talk about, I know that Willis Knighton Healthcare is one of your major partners, and Holy Angels is a new and emerging partnership.
Okay.
Maybe digging in specifically into those. And we can send everyone the slides so they can see more about the strategies for the incumbent worker training programs, if that's okay.
Okay, please do. The next slide, you can go to WNLA or employer partner slide. Great. With our WNLA initiative that I mentioned earlier, the Workforce Innovations of Louisiana, that was made available through our funder collaborative, we started that program with, I guess, 4 base, or actually 3 base employer partners. Willis-Knighton Health System, which is a major healthcare provider here in the area. David Raines, who is a neighbor of ours, is a community health center, and St. Joseph's Hospice. And I left Smart Care off. They're a home health agency, and we deliberately varied the type of businesses that we brought to the table initially, but the partnership continues to grow. Those were the base entities. We were chosen to be the healthcare liaison for this project because we had strong relationships with many of the healthcare employers in town. Willis-Knighton, probably almost as long as Southern has been in existence. We do various clinical affiliations. They sit on our boards. We do the same for them. They are certainly at the leadership level in that they are at this point helping us to fund a new nursing. They help to meet a gap that we had in a nursing facility that we will be building shortly to address the nursing shortfall. So that's a wonderful relationship we have with Willis-Knighton. On the other hand, go ahead.
This is Jim. I wondered, was Willis-Knighton always a participant in your initiative at that level, or did they start less engaged and become more engaged? And what's been the process of the life of that relationship, and what have you done in particular to bring it from very introductory interest all the way to the strong supporter that they are today?
Oh gosh, I would like to take credit for it, but to be honest, I've been at the school now going almost 20 years, but the relationship has been strong for a good while. But I can say it's grown stronger over the years, and it goes back to some of the statements I made earlier. The quality of service, the students that we graduate, involving them, in our day-to-day activities. I mean, it's just the little things, I think, that matter. Job fairs, various programming that we do on campus. Not only do we invite the CEO of the company, but we invite the people in HR and everybody. We kind of see it as a way of staying in contact with one another. Hello?
So, Jan, thanks. I think this is some of the great nuts and bolts that people are really eager to hear. If you think about the different types of employer involvement that Jack framed, including, well, first maybe I'll just run through them. Clearly, they're users of your services. Can you talk a little bit about how they are the recipients of services that you provide?
Of course, they hire graduates. I didn't provide a listing of the training programs that we offer, but we have LPN, CNA, RN, phlebotomy, respiratory radiology. We have a host of healthcare offerings, and they are one of our major hirers. They one of the major employees in town that hire our graduates. As I said, they sit, on our advisory boards and give us input on curriculum. They help us actually in the development of new curriculum. They do have in-house training as well, and we do work with them.
So they're a quality employer that hires a lot of your graduates. And then you started to say that in that second bucket of Jack's, that the planning, governing, and oversight role, they also play an important role in the governance of your program and advising about the development of your curricula and so forth.
Yes, certainly. We would not move in the direction of, major curricula modifications or new curricula without input from a Willis-Knighton and major partners such as Willis-Knighton.
Do you have an employer group that meets to discuss needs and opportunities and express priorities and make decisions? And if so, is Willis-Knighton involved? Do they play a leadership role? What's their
Yes, that's actually what the WNLA Healthcare Alliance is. It's a group of employer employers that meet on a regular basis to discuss needs, and Willis-Knighton is really the lead agency of that board. They provide leadership, they host the meetings, and as was stated earlier by Jack, it really helps when you have other employers at the table who are buying in and supporting. It just lends, I don't know, credence, but it certainly helps with bringing more partners to the table.
And what makes them, this is a question that folks submitted prior to the webinar in the registration process. What makes that group and Willis-Knighton's involvement a meaningful involvement rather than just, say, a rubber stamp group or a group that only meets once a year? And, you know, do they have power? What makes the meetings meaningful and successful both for you and for them?
Well, with the WNLA Alliance, the training that we choose to do, the supportive services that we provide the students, and everything that we do, it has to be agreed upon by that group. The employers they're the voting body to direct the services and the monies and everything that we do and the training. So they guide that process. And what I've noticed since we've entered into that relationship is that some of our academic leaders had talked with these people probably early on when they started their programs, and maybe they weren't talking on a constant basis to keep things current, and WNLA is just helping to keep everybody more abreast to the latest changes and getting everybody at the table and talking again. So it's a good thing. What another partner has come out as a result, Holy Angels, they're a residential training campus for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They provide personalized life skills and vocational education for the individuals that they serve. And they have made a major commitment to their employees that they want to train them all. They want to help them to develop educational and life skills, life plans that will direct the direction that they will go in. They want to help to develop curriculum, assist with, and we've agreed to assist them with equipment needs at their facilities and actually established some training facilities at their site. Of course, we've just entered into a clinical rotation with them. They have agreed to pay their employees while they go through the training. We're working in collaboration to solicit funding to pay for this initiative, which their name is Holy Angels, but the project itself, they're calling it Angel University. So this is new. It came about as a result of the Alliance getting started and us just reaching out, making scripted calls to entities in the community that we did not have relationships with, but we thought we would just, you start off small, making calls, and this is a call that was well worth our time.
Well, that's great. I think it's really helpful. I know that folks on the line will have some specific questions to dig down with you about. If it's all right, maybe now we go into questions, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to hear more specifically about what you do on the ground there in Shreveport.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So I am going to look. Let's see if I can. Maria Cruz Lucio has asked a nice question about some of the sort of logistics of operating those advisory groups. Maria, I wonder, I've unmuted you. Do you have a question or questions that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I've put out several questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes. Well, I was just wondering about how they're organized as a group. How are they structured? Is there like an executive committee running it, and who takes care of the busy work? Employers are kind of busy people, but wondering if there's like a support system in place. Are those the sector partners that share that oversight and responsibility?
That's a great question. So Janice, maybe you can talk about your employer advisory council and how it works. Are you the staff to that council? What do you do? Who sets the agenda? How do you make it work from meeting to meeting?
Sure, gladly. With WNLA, SUSLA and our team, we're the staff, we're the legwork that makes it happen. Because as you say, the employers generally don't have the time to do that piece. We try to make it quick and painless as possible for them. We have what we've identified, a person called an employee specialist who does a lot of the calls and the contacting and the follow-up. Our director of workforce and our director of nursing and our director, well, I should say our dean of nursing and our chairperson of healthcare. They're very intimately involved in this process as well. So when it gets down to the piece of curriculum development and modification, they're brought on. Our workforce development person and continuing ed. So we kind of connect to the entities on campus or off campus that we need to in order to respond to what the employer is telling us they need. But as far as the quarterly meetings that we have, we kind of orchestrate that, and we try to have them, on site with the employer partners, and we keep the minutes and keep all that flowing and keep the employers engaged and continue to call new employees and try to connect more employees every quarter. So we keep that moving, and that's all a part of what WNLA pushes. The funding is there for us to set that mechanism up in place, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
The funding, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, that sounds really good. I mean, I think they need that support system.
Yeah. Otherwise, it'll be a situation where you put in something else on somebody's plate, and it just might get pushed to the side. But now we're able to give it, the attention that it deserves, and we can be responsive, timely, and do what we're supposed to do.
So, Janice, it sounds like one real secret to success is to having a designated role and some staff time in order to really facilitate the employer partnership and the involvement of employers. It can't be just something that gets squeezed in. It has to be dedicated. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but being careful not to recreate. You got to really have a savvy person who understands what's on the campus and who to connect to, what's in the community, because it's not about recreating what's already been done, but aligning and connecting the right people together at the table to address a need. But you do need that liaison person. We did have to hire someone to do that.
Okay. Jack, is there anything that you want to add from your view of other sector initiatives around the country and how they manage this process?
Yeah. Yes, two thoughts. One is that a way of thinking about this is that there's an organization that's the hub of the sector initiative, or the workforce intermediary, and it's managing a number of things. It's in particular managing the relationship with employers as far as this conversation goes. One way of thinking about the staffing responsibility that needs to exist for that workforce intermediary hub organization is it's good to have an FTE, one full-time equivalent person, to do the whole variety of things, including involvement of employers, maintaining those relationships, also managing the relationships with the other service providers that are involved with the sector initiative. Now, how that happens really varies. So one thing we're seeing a fair amount in the Workforce Investment Board and one-stop world these days is use of the business services staff at the one-stop to carry out that relationship. In particular, as workforce boards and one-stops are more focused on particular industry sectors, they will find it makes more sense to allocate their business services staff to managing a particular industry sector's relationships with employers.
Well, that's very helpful. It's interesting that you bring up the WIBs because, Maria, also you had a question about the workforce boards and their employer composition. If I understand your question correctly, it's something along the lines of shouldn't workforce boards be providing this employer input? And maybe it would be helpful for you to express that question, and then particularly, Jack, for you to respond to it. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Or did I miss?
No, as I was listening to all this, talk about employer involvement and initiatives, you know, it reminded me of the WIB boards, you know, and there's, my understanding is that 51% representation is the employer, and that's what they're there for. The purpose is to represent the employer needs and also create a system that's going to meet their needs.
Well, let me suggest two things about that. One is that there's a great variation in the effectiveness of workforce boards around the country. And the second is that we find that there are a whole variety of organizations that are that hub, that workforce intermediary. So in Janice's case, it's a educational institution. But also you could think of industry associations, so, labor management partnerships, community-based organizations, and then of course community colleges and workforce boards. If a workforce board is, effective, that is, if it really does involve those employers in a meaningful way, and if the workforce board looks at things from an industry sector focused point of view, because 51% of employers on the board doesn't mean that there's necessarily employers from the key industries in the region or in the community. But if there is, then that workforce board can really do a great job. One example, Lancaster County Workforce Investment Board in Pennsylvania, they have a manufacturing sector initiative, agricultural sector initiative, also construction and healthcare. In Pennsylvania, they call them industry partnerships, actually. You know, it's a small city and a large surrounding rural county, but for, a long time, they've been executing very effectively on a commitment to this industry sector-focused approach. So they do a great job at it, but you have to look at the individual WIB.
Right, and our two local WIBs, they serve on our board. So
your connection with the WIB is that they are part of your board or advisory group.
Right, and they invest in it as well, and we work very closely based on the programs, the new programs that we're creating, the direction that we're going in, trying to ensure that those are approved programs, that when our students get ready to go through the training, that there would be programs that will fund, approved training programs through our local WIB boards. So we have a pretty good relationship going with WINLA and our WIB boards.
Well, thanks for that. And Jack, if I could touch on what you said, I think what I heard was that WIBs can play an important or even lead role in this process, but in order to do that, they need to have structures just like the ones that Janice has set up in order for that involvement to take place, because the board itself is not an industry-focused group necessarily. No. And so WIBs that do this well have separate employer industry-focused groups that meet around key industries that have been identified, those WIBs, to identify, to set priorities and then act on them. Would that be a fair add-on to what you said?
I think that's yes. I think that's exactly right. I'd go a step farther. What Janice said about not reinventing the wheel is really important. It can be that there is a labor management partnership, for instance, in an industry. One example is up in the counties west of Minneapolis-St. Paul, there's an outfit called Empowered. It's a manufacturing sector initiative, urban and suburban area, and the leadership group there is the Precision Metal Formers Association. It's a great industry association. And, there's a very effective WIB in that area, but because what they have working with Empowered is very effective, it's not like they're trying to reinvent that wheel. Pennsylvania as well, another example, District 1199C is a labor management partnership. They really have great employer involvement, And there's a very effective WIB in Philadelphia, which is where they're located. But the Philadelphia WIB supports the work of the 1199C Training and Upgrading Fund rather than trying to do that work. So knowing what the structures are and the ways in which a WIB is going to be able to support a sector initiative is very important. The other thing that's important is to know who else is doing whatever in the area that the WIB is responsible for.
All right. Thank you, Jack. And Maria, thank you for those questions. I know you have another question that I think I'll incorporate into our additional questions, but I really do appreciate the questions that you submitted and you're asking them.
Sure, thank you.
So one of the other questions that Maria had touches on something that several others have asked and that came up prior to the webinar, which is what's the process of hooking an employer initially? What's the pitch? How do you engage employers at the start? How do you make them available aware of what you have to offer and get their buy-in? And I thought that it might be helpful to ask you, Janice, particularly in the context of this emerging work with Holy Angels, as a newer employer partner of yours, how did they first come to be aware of you? How did you reach out to them and engage them at the very earliest stages?
I believe just kind of through our community contacts, the Community Foundation. I mentioned earlier that they wrote to the National Fund to bring the dollars to this region, and I believe the Community Foundation connected Holy Angels and Southern University and asked that we sit down and talk. So it was referenced that way. So just kind of being connected and that type of way, that helps. Of course, go ahead.
So through the development of funding, there was an opportunity to bring Holy Angels on board. And then, how did you take that and start to operationalize it? How did you make it from, obviously there must have been some handoff, I suppose.
Oh yeah, we had an initial meeting where our leadership went to their location to learn more about their agency, ensuring that we brought the right people to the table to tell about what our offerings. As I said earlier, some marriages are a good marriage because what we do and what they need was so connected. Sometimes you're just trying to make things fit that's just not a fit at that particular time, but the needs that they had was that of a community college that provided health care offerings, and we do that. And in some cases working with the underprepared students. So that was a niche. So as we talked and heard more about their need and they heard more about what we do, it just became a natural fit. But I tried to work really hard to do the homework, before we had the meeting, to know as much as we could about the agency. So we would bring the kind of information, did not want to waste their time, so we could bring the kind of information that they would need in order to make that decision if they wanted to have that second, that third meeting, if they wanted to work with us. So those are some of the things we did.
Well, that's really helpful to imagine this meeting that you had with them and the prep that you did for that. I suppose based on that prep, you decided who the right people were to bring to the table. Right.
Yeah, when you look out there. Yeah.
Who were the right people?
In that particular case, our chairperson of Allied Health, as I think someone from our nursing department, our director of continuing education is involved in the process. And then as we talked, we realized that they had an entrepreneurship piece that they were interested in, and a financial literacy piece that they were interested in for their employees. So it even grew bigger. The pool of individuals that we needed to connect them with grew larger. But just initially, we tried to do as much research as we could so we could bring the right people or the right information so we would be prepared for that talk.
Well, that's really helpful. In thinking about how you reach out to other employers, Do you have a process in place for expanding the employer base that's involved with you? And if so, who does what?
One process we're going to use, one of our partners and funders is our Greater Shreveport Chamber of Commerce, and they have a pretty good listing of healthcare partners that belong to the chamber, and we're working together to reach out to those partners to introduce to them the concept of WNLA and the win-wins associated with it. So we're getting a partner that everybody's comfortable with. They know to work in collaboration with us to reach out and say, hey, won't you, meet with Southern University and learn more about this particular program. It may be of value to you and your employees. That's one approach. We have information on various healthcare providers. We do make cold calls, but even in making those cold calls and to tell them about the program, we try to be a little bit prepared. Every call doesn't fit every employer. So those are two things, working with other existing agencies and partners to help us to get in the door, and then doing those basic cold calls and the preparation that you do in order to make that call. Those are two things we're doing with WNLA right now. So our goal is every quarter to bring on, one or two, maybe three additional employer partners, keeping in mind that all partners aren't going to be as engaged, it's not going to rise to the level of a leadership partner like Willis Knighton is, or move as fastly as the Holy Angels relationship is. Some of them may just come and say, hey, I just want you to refer your graduates. I just want your graduates, and just stay connected with my HR department. That's still good, That's still an outcome. So, then we're working on a database which speaks to the, reaching how many times we reach out, what's the response, what's the outcome as a result of the call versus the visit, so we can kind of look at our approaches and see what's working and what's not.
So you've hit upon a number of areas of questions, and for those of you who sent in questions, just in the interest of time, I'm going to be asking questions for you rather than giving you a chance to ask them yourself. But I mean, this question about how you track employer involvement is one that was asked earlier, and it says that it sounds like you either have or are developing a database.
Yeah, it's nothing fancy. We're just keeping it in. It's nothing fancy. We're just keeping it in an Excel spreadsheet. If someone has something that they can suggest, we'd be glad to hear about that. But right now, we're just doing it with the basic applications on our desktops.
I'll speak from my experience on this. When I was at JVS in San Francisco, we had a customer relationship management software that we used. We used Salesforce, and we kept track of both of client-side activities and outcomes, but also employer-side activities and outcomes using that tracking mechanism. So any time that there was a call to a particular employer, that got logged in Salesforce, and any time that they sent volunteers to participate in a hiring event or a job search prep course, that got logged. I think one of the things that JVS has found is that having this information has allowed them to demonstrate a nice correlation between employer involvement and placement outcomes. So that it may be unclear which is the chicken and which is the egg, which came first. I think it's probably a mutually reinforcing thing, but the more involved employers are in all kinds of aspects of the program, the more likely they are to hire graduates of that program. There was a question about whether you found that. Go ahead, Jack.
Just to add on the question of systems for tracking employer involvement, I know a number of sector initiatives use software called Efforts to Outcomes, and it's really designed for tracking program participants, but it's basically a case management design, but it's also quite flexible. And so some sector initiatives have designed into Efforts to Outcomes the employer involvement tracking side as well.
I realize that well, for us it's 12:30 on the West Coast. For Jack it's 3:30. For Janice it's 2:30. But whatever, that's the the appointed hour of the end of our webinar. I wonder, since we're having some rich discussion, whether you all can stay on just a few more minutes longer, Janice and Jack.
I have to go into another meeting, but I don't mind you sharing. I don't think on the slides you have for me my contact email information. I don't mind sharing that, and someone could email me with a question later, but I have to go into another meeting. I do apologize.
Well, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give folks more of a chance to benefit from talking with you. So what we'll have to do is give that contact information or other ways for folks to follow up. And what we'll do is we'll actually close the session, but know that I will be screening questions that have not yet been answered yet, and I'll be sending responses to folks where I can. And I want to thank you, Janice and Jack, in particular, for contributing your expertise on this session. It's really clearly a crucial topic for folks in the sector field.
And Jim, remind them we'll be at the training that's coming up on October the 18th and 19th, and my presentation will be more in depth with regard to the WNLA. So.
Right. Okay. Yes. Thanks. So we are having a conference in Jackson, Mississippi, on sector initiatives in the Mid-South, including a presentation with Janice and another healthcare sector initiative, this one from Mississippi, talking about all these kinds of nuts and bolts details at greater length and in person, where you might have a chance to talk with Janice herself. So thank you for flagging that, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible there. Before you go,
just on that topic, there will also be a session on strong employer involvement at the conference, and another group that does a great job on this, Mississippi Corridor Consortium in Northwest Mississippi, would be co-presenting on that.
Right, with a focus on a different industry sector, manufacturing. So I think some of the ways of engaging employers transcend industry. Some are industry specific. There'll be a different flavor to that session at the conference as well. So thanks for saying that too, Jack. And as you sign off, I'd like to ask again that one small favor. Please do give us your input about this session. It should take 30 seconds or less. It can be very brief, but it's helpful to us, and we'll use it to improve future sessions. And I've thanked our panelists, but thank you for participating in today's webinar. We really appreciate the expertise that you bring and also your great questions. So until next time, be well, do good work, and keep in touch.